Every morning at 5:30, Tom pushed his cleaning cart through the endless corridors of Starbase Alpha. The wheels squeaked on the polished metal floors, but nobody ever complained about the noise. Nobody noticed Tom at all. He was just part of the background, like the humming air vents or the soft glow of the wall panels. Tom had been cleaning these halls for 15 years. He knew every corner, every hidden pipe, every loose floor panel. He also knew every secret conversation that happened in the meeting rooms, because the air ducts carried voices better than most people realized. The high-ranking officers talked, like he wasn't there, which was almost true. They saw his uniform and their eyes just slid past him. But Tom hadn't always pushed a mop. 25 years ago, he wore a different uniform with shiny bars on the collar. Back then, people called him Lieutenant Reed and asked for his opinions on battle plans. That was before the plasma blast tore through his left leg and left his hand with a permanent shake. The military offered him a desk job, but Tom chose maintenance work instead. He liked working with his hands, and he liked being invisible. The base was buzzing with nervous energy today. The Corvani Empire had been sending scout ships to the outer colonies, testing human defenses. Everyone knew a real attack was coming soon. The aliens had better ships, better weapons, and they thought humans were nothing more than primitive animals good only for hard labor in their minds. Tom was replacing burnt-out light panels in the TO main corridor when Admiral Brooks walked past with his staff. The Admiral looked older than his 50 years, with deep lines around his eyes and gray hair that had been black just last year. The pressure of defending humanity was wearing him down. "The War Council meets in 1 hour," Brooks told his officers. "I want options, gentlemen. Real options, not just another plan to die with honor." Commander Walsh nodded grimly. "Sir, our best computer models all show the same result. If the Corvani bring their full fleet, we'll last maybe 6 months. Their technology is just too advanced." Tom listened while screwing in a new light fixture. He'd heard similar conversations dozens of times over the past few weeks. The human military leaders were smart people, but they all thought about war the same way. They wanted to meet the enemy ship to ship, weapon to weapon, like some kind of fair fight. But war wasn't supposed to be fair. Tom had learned that lesson a long time ago. After the officers passed, Tom continued his work. He moved slowly because his leg ached, but his mind was racing. He thought about everything he'd overheard about the Corvani fleet. Their ships worked like one giant machine, all connected by quantum computers that shared information instantly. Every ship knew what every other ship was doing. It made them incredibly powerful, but it also made them predictable. That afternoon, Tom was cleaning the ventilation system above the main briefing room when the emergency meeting began. Through the metal grates, he could see Admiral Brooks pointing at a holographic display showing the enemy fleet. 300 ships arranged in perfect formation, each one bigger than anything humanity had ever built. "Intelligence reports they'll attack within the week," Brooks announced to his senior staff. "Their strategy is flawless. They'll overwhelm our outer defenses, then move in for the kill. We have 43 ships against their 300. Colonel Davis, the head of fleet operations, shook his head. "We could try hit-and-run attacks, but their shields regenerate faster than we can damage them. Their gravitational weapons can tear our ships apart from a distance we can't even reach." Tom watched the hologram rotate, showing the alien ships from every angle. The officers saw an impossible enemy. Tom saw something different. He saw ships that had never fought anyone who didn't play by their rules. He saw an enemy that had won so many battles they'd forgotten how to lose. The meeting ended with the usual result. They would make their stand and hope for the best. Tom finished cleaning the vents and went back to his small quarters. Most people on the base lived in shared barracks, but maintenance workers got private rooms. It was one of the few advantages of being invisible. Tom sat at his small desk and started writing. His damaged hand made it slow work, but he kept going. He wrote about supply lines and communication networks. He wrote about psychology and expectations. Most importantly, he wrote about how an enemy's greatest strength could become their greatest weakness if you knew how to turn it against them. By morning, he had filled 12 pages with detailed tactical analysis. It wasn't the kind of plan any military academy would teach, but Tom had learned his most important lessons in real combat, not in classrooms. He'd learned that sometimes the best way to win was to lose first, and the best way to look strong was to appear weak. Tom folded the pages carefully and put them in an envelope addressed to Admiral Brooks. Then he got dressed and started another day of pushing his cleaning cart through the halls of Starbase Alpha. People walked past him without a glance, just like always. But today might be the last day that nobody noticed Tom. The Corvani fleet was coming, and humanity's greatest military minds were preparing to fight them the wrong way. Tom's plan might sound crazy to people who thought about war in terms of honor and fair fights. But Tom had stopped believing in fair fights the day alien plasma had shredded his leg. War was about winning, and Tom knew exactly how to beat an enemy that had never learned how to lose. He just had to convince someone to listen to a janitor. The next morning started like any other, but Tom's hands shook more than usual as he sealed the envelope containing his tactical analysis. Getting it to Admiral Brooks would be the tricky part. The military had strict chains of command, and janitors weren't part of that chain. Tom's first stop was the Admiral's outer office, where Lieutenant Reeves sat behind a desk covered in official reports and coffee cups. Reeves was young, maybe 25, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been really tested. He looked up with annoyance when Tom approached. "What do you want?" Reeves asked, not bothering to hide his irritation. "If something's broken, file a maintenance request like everyone else." Tom held out the envelope. "I have a strategic proposal for the Admiral regarding the Corvani situation." Reeves stared at him for a long moment, then laughed. It wasn't a friendly sound. "You're joking, right? A janitor thinks he can solve what our best tactical experts can't figure out? I have relevant combat experience, sir. I served during the border conflicts and—" "I don't care where you think you served," Reeves cut him off. "This is completely inappropriate. Get back to your mop and bucket before I write you up for insubordination." Tom had expected this reaction. That's why he'd made copies and submitted them through other channels. He'd slipped one under Commander Walsh's door, left another on Colonel Davis's desk, and sent a third through the base's internal mail system. Someone would read it eventually. But the day passed with no response. Tom cleaned floors and emptied trash cans while officers hurried past, their faces tight with worry. The Corvani fleet was getting closer, and humanity's leaders were running out of time to find a solution. That evening, Commander Walsh was working late in his office, reviewing personnel files for the upcoming battle. He wanted to make sure every position was filled by the most qualified person available. That's when he noticed something strange in the maintenance staff records. Thomas Reed, Custodial Services, had an unusual background. 25 years ago, he'd been Lieutenant Thomas Reed, decorated officer and tactical specialist. His service record showed 3 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat and a Silver Star for developing innovative battlefield strategies. The file also showed why he'd left active duty: severe injuries from a plasma weapon that left him partially disabled. Walsh frowned and called up his message system. Among the dozen reports waiting for his attention was one from maintenance worker Thomas Reed. Walsh almost deleted it automatically, but something made him open it instead. The first page made him sit up straighter in his chair. The second page made him grab his coffee and settle in for serious reading. By the time he finished, Walsh was already reaching for his communicator to call Admiral Brooks. "Sir, I need to see you immediately," Walsh said when Brooks answered. "I've found something that could change everything." 20 minutes later, Admiral Brooks was in Walsh's office reading Tom's proposal. The plan was unlike anything in standard military doctrine. Instead of meeting the Corvani in direct battle, it proposed using their strengths against them. Their ships were connected by quantum communication networks that allowed perfect coordination. But that same network could be disrupted by the right kind of interference. The plan required human ships to act in ways that seemed random and desperate. They would break formation, attack individually, and retreat without apparent coordination. To observers, it would look like panic, but each move would be calculated to draw the Corvani into specific positions where their technological advantages would become disadvantages. "This is brilliant," Brooks muttered, reading through the tactical details. Completely unorthodox. But brilliant. Where did you say this came from? Thomas Reed, sir. He's been working maintenance here for 15 years. But his service record shows he's the same Reed who broke the siege at Titan Base during the border conflicts. Brooks remembered that battle. It had been considered impossible to win until someone developed new tactics that turned the enemy's advantages against them. Get Reed up here now. Tom was replacing air filters in a storage closet when the call came. He'd been expecting it, but his heart still pounded as he made his way to the command level. He hadn't been in these offices since his injury forced him out of active service. The Admiral's office hadn't changed much. The same massive desk, the same wall displays showing fleet positions, the same sense of barely controlled crisis that came with defending humanity's survival. But Admiral Brooks looked older than Tom remembered, worn down by the weight of impossible decisions. Reed, Brooks began, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Commander Walsh tells me you have some interesting ideas about fighting the Corvani. Tom sat down carefully, his damaged leg making the movement awkward. Yes, sir. I believe their technological superiority can be turned into a vulnerability. Explain. Tom had rehearsed this conversation in his mind for hours. The Corvani fleet operates as a single unit through quantum communication. Every ship knows what every other ship is doing. It makes them incredibly efficient, but it also makes them predictable. They've never fought an enemy that doesn't follow their rules. Brooks leaned forward. And you think we can disrupt their communications? With the right kind of interference, yes, sir. Something that looks like natural cosmic radiation but specifically targets their quantum frequencies. We have mining equipment that could be modified to generate that kind of static. And then? Then we fight like humans, sir. Chaotic, unpredictable, adaptive. Everything they're not programmed to handle. Brooks studied the man sitting across from his desk. This was the janitor his officers had dismissed, the invisible maintenance worker they'd ignored for 15 years. But Brooks saw something else. The tactical genius who had saved Titan Base, the wounded veteran who had chosen to serve his species in a different way. Reed, I'm temporarily reactivating your commission. Congratulations, Lieutenant Commander. You're now my senior tactical advisor for this operation. Tom felt something stir in his chest that had been quiet for 15 years. Thank you, sir. We'll need to move fast. The Corvani will be here in less than a week. As Tom left the Admiral's office wearing his new rank insignia, word was already spreading through the base. The janitor nobody had noticed was suddenly the most important person on Starbase Alpha. Some officers were embarrassed by how they'd treated him. Others were skeptical that a maintenance worker could really save them. But Tom didn't care about their opinions. He had work to do, and not much time to do it. The Corvani were coming, and humanity's survival depended on a plan that would either be remembered as brilliant or insane. Either way, it beat dying with honor. The transformation of Starbase Alpha happened overnight. What had been a place of quiet desperation became a hive of frantic but organized activity. Tom found himself at the center of it all, his maintenance coveralls replaced by a crisp tactical uniform he hadn't worn in decades. The insignia felt heavy on his collar, but his voice was steady when he addressed the assembled fleet commanders. The main briefing room was packed with officers who had never given Tom a second glance. Now they hung on his every word as he explained. Operation Scattered Stars, Captain Morris of the heavy cruiser. Determination looked skeptical as Tom outlined his ship's role in the plan. You want me to fake a reactor failure and broadcast distress signals? Morris asked, his weathered face showing doubt. My crew has never run from a fight, Lieutenant Commander. This feels like cowardice. Tom understood the resistance. These were career military officers trained to meet enemies head-on. It's not running, Captain, it's bait. The Corvani prefer to capture intact ships rather than destroy them. They need the technology and they want prisoners for their slave workforce. When your ship appears disabled, they'll move in for capture instead of kill shots. Commander Peters from the destroyer Swift Arrow raised her hand. What about our fighter squadrons? Your plan has them attacking without any coordination. That goes against everything we've learned about space combat. That's exactly the point, Tom replied, moving to the tactical display. The Corvani expect coordinated attacks because that's how military forces operate. Random, seemingly desperate strikes will confuse their defensive systems. Their computers will waste processing power trying to find patterns that don't exist. The hardest part wasn't explaining the tactics. It was convincing proud officers to act like they were losing when everything in their training told them to project strength. Tom spent hours with each ship commander, going over their specific roles and timing. Lieutenant Davies, the base communications officer, had been the most resistant to working with Tom. He'd been one of the officers who regularly ignored the janitor's presence. Now he found himself working closely with Tom on the most crucial part of the plan, the interference generators. These modified mining lasers will create quantum static, Tom explained as they calibrated the equipment in the base's main engineering bay. To Corvani sensors, it'll look like natural cosmic radiation from a stellar storm. They won't realize it's artificial until it's too late. Davies watched Tom's damaged hands work carefully on the delicate circuitry. How do you know so much about Corvani technology? Our intelligence is pretty limited. Tom smiled grimly. I've been listening to intelligence briefings for 15 years. Most people don't notice maintenance workers, so they talk freely. I've probably heard more classified information than most senior officers. The irony wasn't lost on Davies. The same invisibility that had made Tom ignored had given him access to information no single officer would normally have. And you think this will really work? The Corvani have conquered half the galaxy using the same tactics every time, Tom said, making a final adjustment to the quantum resonator. Perfect coordination, overwhelming firepower, technological superiority. They've never faced an enemy that fights dirty. Word of the plan spread through the fleet, and reactions were mixed. Some officers embraced the unconventional approach, excited by the chance to surprise an overconfident enemy. Others worried that humanity was abandoning its honor for a desperate trick that might not work. Tom worked 18-hour days, moving from ship to brief crews personally. His injured leg ached constantly, but he pushed through the pain. There would be time to rest after the battle, assuming they survived. On the destroyer Vigilant, he met with the squadron leaders who would coordinate the random fighter attacks. These were young pilots, most of them barely out of training. They listened intently as Tom explained how their apparent chaos would hide careful planning. Remember, you want to look desperate, not stupid, Tom told them. Make attack runs that seem panicked but actually target specific systems. Hit their sensor arrays, their communication relays, anything that will add to their confusion when we spring the trap. Flight Leader Anderson, a pilot who couldn't be older than 22, asked the question Tom had been expecting. Sir, what if this doesn't work? What if they see through our act? Tom looked around the room at the young faces staring back at him. These pilots would be in the most danger, flying their small fighters against massive alien warships. They deserved an honest answer. If it doesn't work, we'll fight them the conventional way and probably lose, Tom said simply. But I've spent 25 years thinking about this kind of warfare. The Corvani have won every battle because their enemies tried to match their strengths. We're going to attack their weaknesses instead. As the Corvani fleet drew closer, Tom felt the familiar mixture of fear and anticipation that came before battle. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't just following orders or hoping for the best. This time, humanity had a real chance. Admiral Brooks found Tom in the tactical center at 3 a.m, hunched over displays showing ship positions and timing calculations. The older man looked exhausted, but there was something new in his eyes. Hope. Reed, you should get some rest, Brooks said. The battle begins in less than 12 hours. Tom looked up from his calculations. Almost finished, sir. I want to run through the timing one more time. If we're off by even 30 seconds, the whole plan falls apart. Do you really think this will work? Tom saved his work and turned to face his commanding officer. Sir, I've been watching this base for 15 years. I've seen how people react under pressure, how they make decisions, how they adapt to unexpected situations. The Corvani are used to fighting enemies who follow military doctrine. They've never fought humans who are scared, desperate, and willing to try anything. Brooks nodded slowly. And those are our advantages? Yes, sir. Fear makes you creative. Desperation makes you take risks. and humans are better at both than any species the Corvani have ever faced. As Tom finally headed to his quarters for a few hours of rest, he passed through the corridors where he'd pushed his cleaning cart for so many years. The base was quieter now, but he could feel the tension in the air. In a few hours, the most important battle in human history would begin. Tom had spent 15 years being invisible, watching and learning while others made the big decisions. Tomorrow, everything he'd observed about human nature and alien psychology would be put to the ultimate test. The janitor they had mocked was about to find out if he really could become the human who won the war. The enemy arrived like death itself. 300 Corvani warships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system, their dark hulls gleaming with alien technology. Each ship was larger than anything humanity had ever built, armed, with weapons that could crack planets and protected by shields that had never been penetrated. Tom stood in the command center of Starbase Alpha, watching the tactical displays show the approaching doom. His mouth was dry, but his hands were steady as he monitored the interference generators hidden throughout the asteroid belt. Everything depended on perfect timing and the hope that his 15 years of observation had taught him something the military academies had missed. Admiral Brooks stood beside him, trying to project calm confidence to the officers around them. But Tom could see the tension in the older man's shoulders. This wasn't just another battle. This was the moment that would decide whether humanity survived as a free species or spent eternity as slaves in alien mines. Corvani fleet is broadcasting on all frequencies, reported Lieutenant Davies from the communications station. His voice was carefully controlled, but Tom could hear the fear underneath. The alien message filled the command center with mechanical precision. Primitive humans, your resistance ends now. Submit to Corvani authority and some of you will be allowed to live as workers. Continue to fight, and your species will be eliminated. You have 1 standard hour to surrender your weapons and prepare for occupation. The message was exactly what Tom had expected. Arrogant, efficient, and completely predictable. The Corvani had delivered similar ultimatums to dozens of species across the galaxy. None had ever refused, because none had ever found a way to win. Send our response, Admiral Brooks ordered. Tom had helped write humanity's reply. It was brief, and to the point, come and take them. The Corvani fleet began its advance with mechanical precision. Their ships moved in perfect formation, each vessel maintaining exact distance from its neighbors. It was beautiful in its coordination and terrifying in its implications. This wasn't just a military force. This was a machine designed for conquest. All ships, assume initial positions, Brooks commanded. Operation Scattered Stars is now active. The human fleet looked pathetic compared to the alien armada. 43 ships, many of them outdated and outgunned, spreading across space in loose formations that seemed haphazard and disorganized. To any observer, it would look like humanity was already beaten. But Tom knew better. Each ship was exactly where it needed to be, positioned to execute the most important deception in human history. Corvani lead elements are entering the outer system, reported the tactical officer. They're maintaining standard conquest formation. Tom watched the alien ships advance with growing confidence. Everything was proceeding exactly as he'd predicted. The Corvani were treating this like every other conquest they'd ever undertaken. They saw scattered human ships and assumed panic. They saw disorganization and assumed defeat. Captain Morris, you're cleared to begin, Tom said into his communicator. Light years away, the heavy cruiser Determination opened fire with what appeared to be a desperate, uncoordinated barrage. The shots went wide of their intended targets, looking like the panicked firing of an outgunned crew. Then Morris began broadcasting on emergency frequencies. Mayday, Mayday. This is the Terran vessel Determination. We've suffered critical reactor damage and are losing power. Request immediate assistance. The deception was perfect. To Corvani sensors, the cruiser's power readings showed catastrophic failure. Emergency venting from the ship's waste systems created the illusion of atmosphere loss. Morris had even shut down half his weapons systems to complete the appearance of a disabled vessel. The Corvani response was immediate and predictable. Instead of destroying the apparently helpless cruiser, 3 of their ships moved to capture. and its living prisoners were more valuable than wreckage, and intact human technology could be useful for understanding enemy capabilities. Phase 1 is successful, Tom announced. Enemy vessels are taking the bait. Across the battlefield, other human ships began their parts in the carefully choreographed deception. The destroyer Swift Arrow launched a series of seemingly desperate attacks, its fighters breaking formation and attacking individual targets with no apparent coordination. The light cruiser Vigilant broadcast false distress calls while maneuvering into position behind a debris field. To outside observers, it looked like the collapse of military discipline. Ships were breaking formation, attacking without orders, and retreating in apparent panic. It was exactly the kind of chaos the Corvani expected from an inferior species facing inevitable defeat. But Tom saw the real pattern. Each random attack was actually targeting specific systems. Every desperate retreat was positioning human ships for the next phase of the plan. The apparent chaos was the most carefully planned military operation in human history. Corvani fleet is adjusting formation, the tactical officer reported. They're moving to envelope our scattered forces. Perfect. The aliens were doing exactly what Tom had hoped. Their ships were spreading out to surround and capture the apparently panicking human vessels. The tight formation that gave them their greatest strength was dissolving as they moved to exploit what looked like easy prey. "Sir," Davies called from his station. "Corvani commanders are broadcasting to their fleet. They're ordering capture protocols for all human vessels. They want prisoners and intact technology." Tom allowed himself a small smile. The enemy's arrogance was making them careless. They were so confident of victory that they weren't bothering with their usual overwhelming force tactics. Instead, they were trying to preserve as much human equipment as possible for later study. "All stations prepare for Phase 2, Admiral Brooks commanded. "Interference generators stand by." Tom moved to the control station he'd spent the past week preparing. The modified mining equipment looked crude compared to the sophisticated military hardware around it, but it would create exactly the kind of quantum static needed to disrupt Corvani communications. The alien fleet continued its advance, their ships now spread across a much wider area as they moved to capture individual human vessels. They're perfect. Coordination was still intact, but it was about to face its greatest test. "Corvani lead elements are now within optimal range," Tom reported. "All target vessels are in position." Admiral Brooks looked around the command center one last time. Every officer was at their station. Every system was ready. The next few minutes would determine whether humanity's greatest gamble would pay off or whether they would all be dead before the hour was up. "Execute Phase 2, Brooks ordered. "All ships implement Scattered Stars protocol." Tom pressed the activation sequence, and hidden throughout the asteroid belt, quantum interference generators came online. For several seconds, nothing seemed to change. The Corvani fleet continued its approach, their communications still functioning normally. Then the trap was sprung, and the most technologically advanced military force in the galaxy suddenly found itself fighting blind. The effect was immediate and devastating. Across the Corvani fleet, quantum communication arrays went silent as Tom's interference generators flooded local space with precisely tuned static. For the first time in centuries, Corvani ships found themselves cut off from the collective intelligence that had guided them through countless victories. Tom watched the tactical displays with fierce satisfaction as the alien formation began to waver. Individual ships, suddenly isolated from their command network, struggled to maintain coordination. The perfect military machine that had conquered half the galaxy was coming apart at its most crucial moment. "Now we see what they're really made of," Tom muttered, his damaged hands steady on the control systems. The transformation of the human fleet was spectacular. What had appeared to be random panic attacks suddenly revealed their true purpose. Captain Morris dropped his ship's distress signals and unleashed a concentrated barrage into the unprotected rear sections of two Corvani cruisers that had moved in for capture. Without their defensive coordination, the alien ships were caught completely off guard. "Direct hits on enemy vessels Tango 7 and Tango 9, reported the tactical officer. "Both ships are venting atmosphere and falling behind the main formation." "Commander," Peters in the Swift Arrow led her fighter squadrons in what had seemed like desperate, uncoordinated attacks. But now the true genius of the plan became clear. Each fighter had been targeting specific communication relays and sensor arrays. With Corvani coordination already disrupted, the loss of these systems created cascading failures throughout their defensive networks. Enemy flagship is under attack, Davies reported from his communication station. Multiple fighter squadrons are overwhelming their point defense systems. Tom had predicted this too. Corvani ships were designed to operate as part of a coordinated network. Their individual defensive systems assumed support from other vessels. Cut off from that support, even their most powerful ships became vulnerable to sustained attack by smaller forces. But the aliens weren't helpless. Throughout their scattered fleet, Corvani engineers worked frantically to restore communications. Some ships began adapting to individual operation, their commanders remembering training they'd never expected to use. The window of opportunity would not last forever. Enemy communications are fluctuating, Davies reported. Some ships are establishing short-range links. Tom had expected this. The Corvani were too experienced to remain completely paralyzed for long. That's why the final phase of the plan needed to happen now, while the enemy was still confused and disorganized. All ships, execute Phase 3, Admiral Brooks commanded. Target their command vessels. This was the most dangerous part of Operation Scattered Stars. Human ships that had been pretending to flee or fight desperately suddenly converged on specific targets with devastating precision. The ships broadcasting command frequencies, the vessels trying to coordinate their scattered forces, became the focus of concentrated human attacks. Tom coordinated the strikes from his position at the interference generators, identifying priority targets as they attempted to restore fleet coordination. His voice was calm and steady as he directed the final assault. Vigilant, adjust course 15 degrees starboard. Priority target is the heavy cruiser attempting to establish command links with the Eastern Formation. Swift Arrow, your fighter. Squadrons have clear approach vectors to the enemy flagship. They're still trying to restore their main communication array. Determination. Enemy vessels Tango 12 and Tango 15 are moving to support their command ship. Intercept and engage. The battle became a masterpiece of tactical precision disguised as desperate chaos. Human ships appeared to attack in random panic, while actually executing the most carefully planned assault in military history. Each strike targeted systems crucial to Corvani coordination and command structure. The alien fleet, once an unstoppable force of perfectly coordinated destruction, became a collection of individual ships struggling to function without their technological advantages. Some adapted quickly and fought with skill and courage. Others, too dependent on their network coordination, became easy targets for human weapons. Enemy command ship is breaking apart, reported Captain Morris from the Determination. Secondary explosions are spreading through their forward sections. Tango 7 and Tango 12 are retreating toward the outer system, added Commander Peters. Their escort vessels are following without orders. Tom watched the tactical display as the most powerful military force in the galaxy began to collapse. Ships that had never known defeat were fleeing in disorder, their commanders unable to coordinate an effective response to tactics they'd never encountered. The transformation was remarkable. In less than an hour, humanity had gone from facing certain extinction to achieving the most decisive victory in their history. The technologically superior Corvani fleet was in full retreat, their surviving ships scattered and demoralized. "Sir," Davies called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the Corvani flagship. They're requesting terms for ceasefire." "Admiral." Brooks looked to Tom, who nodded grimly. The plan had worked better than even he had dared hope. The enemy that had seemed invincible was asking for mercy. "Accept their request," Brooks ordered. "But make it clear that any future aggression will be met with the same response." As the immediate crisis ended, Tom found himself surrounded by officers who had ignored him for 15 years. The same people who had looked through him like furniture now regarded him with awe, respect, and perhaps a little fear. The invisible janitor had become the architect of humanity's greatest victory. "Casualty reports are coming in, Commander," Walsh announced. 5 ships damaged, 2 requiring major repairs but no vessels lost. Corvani losses exceed 200 ships destroyed or disabled. The numbers were staggering. Humanity had achieved what military experts had declared impossible, a decisive victory against a technologically superior enemy with minimal losses. The key had been understanding that superior technology meant nothing if you couldn't use it effectively. Admiral Brooks placed his hand on Tom's shoulder as the command center erupted in subdued celebration. "Reed, you've saved our species. The scattered stars doctrine will be studied in military academies for generations." Tom looked around the room at faces that had never really seen him before today. Some officers looked ashamed of how they'd treated him. Others seemed amazed that such tactical genius had been hiding in plain sight. But Tom felt no satisfaction from their belated recognition. "I just did what needed to be done, sir," he said quietly. Sometimes the best solutions come from people who see things differently. In the days that followed, Tom's story spread throughout human space. The janitor who had been mocked and ignored became a hero overnight. Military leaders requested his advice on everything from fleet tactics to strategic planning. Universities offered him teaching positions. Politicians wanted to award him medals and honors. But perhaps the most important change was harder to measure. Humanity had learned that their greatest strength wasn't their technology or their courage. It was their ability to adapt, to find creative solutions when none seemed to exist, and to turn apparent weaknesses into decisive advantages. Tom returned to his quarters that night, exhausted but satisfied. His desk was covered with commendations, promotion offers, and interview requests. Outside his window, the stars looked different now. They were no longer cold and threatening, but full of possibility. The janitor they had mocked had indeed become the human who won the war. But more than that, he had reminded his species of something they had almost forgotten: that every person had value, every perspective had worth, and sometimes the most important solutions came from the most unexpected places. In the maintenance corridors of Starbase Alpha, a new janitor pushed his cart past officers who nodded respectfully. They had learned an important lesson about the danger of overlooking anyone, no matter how invisible they might seem. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again, and humanity would never again underestimate itself.